what became clear throughout the research was, oh, these aren't just subscription and membership issues that consumers have. Like the mindset that consumers have when approaching memberships and subscriptions is exactly how they're approaching all the rest of the retail space. And so if you as a brand or retailer don't have a subscription or membership program, no worries. This research is still extremely relevant to you and to how consumers are approaching your brand when they're shopping.
You're listening to Retail Remix, your inside access to candid conversations with the people shaping retail's future. Here's your host, Alicia Esposito.
Guys, I am so excited to share today's episode with you. I have on the show with me today Melissa Minkow, Director of Retail Strategy of CI&T, and as you probably know, a good friend of mine, and we're talking about some new research that CI&T and Retail TouchPoints did together, focused on building a membership model that resonates. Now, Melissa will share a bit more into the backstory and how this all came about, but in a nutshell, we had Melissa on for our Retail Innovation Conference, and she moderated a great session with IPSI, and IPSI is playing a very distinct role in the evolution of memberships in retail. And what does that mean? And how does it differ from traditional subscriptions, which is very much utilitarian and based on convenience? So we really wanted to dig into the nuances, understand how consumers are understanding this landscape and navigating it, and what is really driving them to engage and be loyal to these programs. I won't bore you with the nitty-gritty details because Melissa and I have a really dynamic conversation about our process, the findings, and even our firsthand experiences with some programs, including Rent the Runway, Hungry Root, and a new one that I'm especially excited about for my son called Crunch Labs. All of them have some great takeaways, lessons, ideas, but without further ado, listen in because we get into a lot. Melissa, welcome back to Retail Remix. So excited to have you on and to dig into this amazing research we did together. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I feel like this was kind of like a kismet situation because we're both so immersed in the world of retail. It's always interesting to hear like where everyone's interests and passion points lie. And we were able to channel our own equal passions around this topic of memberships, which is going to be the big topic. And of course, all this great research that CI&T did for us. But before we get into the results and the data and the analysis, which we love so much, I want to talk about the why a little bit, because obviously you cover all facets of retail, so do I. So why explore memberships and subscriptions of all the topics that we could dig into? Like, what do you find so interesting about the topic? And what made you think that there was a something there that we could explore further? What really stood out to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because the reason we did this research was because of the Retail Innovation Conference and Expo that I was going to be speaking at your event. And we were trying to figure out what can we contribute? How can we make sure that when I'm doing a fireside chat with an executive at the conference, that I'm not only asking good questions, but I'm bringing consumer insights, research, data, and implications for the work that CI&T does as well, because we're a digital consultancy. We help improve and optimize the digital customer experiences for retailers. And so it was just kind of, like you said, this perfect harmony of where is there a white space in consumer shopping behaviors research right now? What are the speakers that are available for the conference that I could be speaking with? And how can I answer some of the questions that they might have every day at their jobs that also help CI&T think through the client work that we're doing? And subscriptions and memberships is such an interesting topic because I think it was probably about 4 years ago. I feel like it was during peak pandemic times where I was hearing a lot of rumblings of consumers just feeling that there was saturation in the subscription market they were really, I feel like what I personally remember as a retail advisor and doing this type of work for, I guess, over a decade now, which is kind of crazy, is that consumers have been thinking about subscriptions and membership services for a while. They became really, really trendy, I think, in the kind of early 2010s for retail, right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, there were a bunch of really trendy companies popping on the scene. And then this kind of saturation, peak subscription fatigue mindset kind of set in, I think, a little bit before the pandemic. And then with the pandemic and consumers needing to stock up on certain items with a sense of urgency, and those items were a lot of kind of table stakes items, I think there was an interest again in memberships, but from a more commodities and utilitarian standpoint rather than the trendiness that subscriptions and memberships were kind of about in the early 2010s. So it was like this weird tension of we consumers recognize that we're kind of over subscriptions and memberships in the way we've seen them in the retail space for a while, and yet maybe we need them again. And then I think now that we've come out of the pandemic and we can be thinking about like little treats and purchases in that way, there's room once again for memberships and subscriptions to be offering some commodities and utilitarian models, but then also to play again in the trend space.
Right. And I think that is what's really interesting. So like, when we say memberships and subscriptions, like this is what interested me about doing this whole thing. It's like, how do we as an industry define these things? And does it align or misalign with what consumers expect from those different things, right? Because to your point, like when I hear subscriptions, like I think of like the early stage subscription boxes, right? Like the Birch boxes, Rocks boxes, like all of those boxes, right? But then it's like the landscape kind of evolved and like there was like this branch off that happened. So like we have some membership programs that have that recurring purchase element to it, but then there are added benefits that make it somehow more meaningful and aligned to consumers on like a deeper level. And then there are subscriptions, which is just you buy this thing every month, we give you a discount, and you just get the thing at your doorstep every month. So in my mind, I was like, okay, well, we're in the industry and like we kind of use words interchangeably and we don't really think twice about it. But does that happen on the consumer side? Or is there like a meaningful understanding of like how consumers consider these different programs and engage with them? So I think having that meeting of the minds was really interesting to me, like to really fully understand like where consumers' heads were. And also, once we knew that, identify like what are the opportunities for our audiences, right? Like the brands and the retailers, because there are so many different ways to develop these programs and design them. So identifying that white space opportunity for them and say, okay, if you do plan to do this, like here are the things to consider and here's how your consumers are thinking about it. And here's how you turn that into an actionable plan, which I honestly think we were able to do pretty successfully, if I do say so myself.
I was just going to say, yeah, I'm proud of us. I think so too. And you just brought up some really important points. I think your perspective on this, that it was such a cool collaboration because you came into the research on a mission from a philosophical standpoint, I think, kind of this conceptual perspective of, okay, how are subscriptions positioned in consumers' minds? Is there flexibility there for retailers? And I really wanted to look at some of the very kind of tactical, in the weeds data from a behavioral standpoint of, okay, yeah, let's compare and contrast. They have that concept in their minds, but then what are they actually doing? What are they actually excited about? Do they even care about subscriptions anymore? And if so, what kinds do they care about? Because I mean, even in our connected retail research, something that I thought was so fascinating was one of the questions we had asked was, do consumers want a website that's straight to the point and efficient, or do they want a more engaging, fun to browse website? And the majority said they want something efficient. And I think that was kind of a perspective or a lens that I brought to the research questions here as well was, do they want subscriptions to just be this set it and forget it, utilitarian convenience thing? Or do they want it to be more exploratory? And is that kind of the inflection point for when they start thinking about a subscription more as a membership and less of a subscription. And so then we ended up asking, do you think memberships and subscriptions are different? And the majority of respondents said yes. And then we asked them open-endedly to explain what they think those key differences are. And some of those verbatims are in the report, and an articulation of or characterization of those viewpoints and differences are in the report as well. And I thought it was really interesting. I don't want to take away too much from what you'll be publishing and sharing from a literary perspective, but it was just fascinating to see consumers differentiate memberships and subscriptions and say that memberships tend to be more of an exclusive thing and more kind of experiential and premium and aspirational, whereas subscriptions are more just kind of that repetitive nature that's useful and convenient. And so then we ended up in the survey defining memberships so that we could provide some clarity. And then we asked things like, do you normally consider Amazon to be in that membership category? What do you want out of memberships? All that. We kind of had to really differentiate so that we could have clarity in our research questions.
Yeah, which I think is really important, right? Because I think a lot of how we define things, it's contextual to our own behaviors and just how we look at the world, right?
Totally.
So I'm glad we kind of went into that process, creating a level set of sorts, like, okay, like as you think about these topics, here's how we want to define them. You brought up Amazon. It seems like that is a very strong association now. Like as we talk about memberships and even just subscription as a topic, right? Because they have kind of both, right? Like they have subscribe to save and then they have Prime, which is more of like a membership model. And like that came up quite a bit, right? Like we try to make sure they were included in some capacity.
Yeah, we have to, right? And I think what's so tricky is Amazon, you cannot ignore them. They are a best practice in so many ways. And I think we tried to provide a definition for memberships that didn't steer consumers towards Amazon to see if they still went there, and they still did. We provided this definition, and then we said, would you normally consider Amazon to be in the membership category alongside the brands that we mentioned, which were Ipsy, Stitch Fix, FabFitFun, BarkBox, and 72% said yes. So to your point, it's like they have the subscribe to save, they have Prime, which is a membership. But when consumers described open-endedly what they thought a membership was, it didn't really suit the Amazon Prime model. And yet 72% of them still said, yes, Amazon is a membership. Yeah, it's like you can't get away from it. And Amazon is a best practice, and that's okay. And I think even, I saw the other day that they're doing this invite only thing for Prime members for Prime deals ahead of Prime Day. And I think that's a phenomenal way of even adding an echelon to the Prime membership and providing an additional premium service that goes beyond the baseline of Prime. Because I think at this point, the Prime membership is almost like a baseline for all the members. But at the same time, it still feels premium because they're still classifying it as a membership and not a subscription. So really interesting.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of reassuring that Amazon is getting into that territory, because I know as we outlined some of the trigger points for like what makes a membership appealing or intriguing to consumers, I know it's something that we've covered in a few instances is like having that early access or that exclusivity component. So it's like even Amazon is realizing, oh, we need to like do some more of that stuff in order to level up the benefits of being a member, right? And I think that could be just an indicator that consumers are expecting more, but also just the playing field is getting more competitive, right? It's not just Walmart Plus anymore now. It's, Target has its own membership program. So even the big guys are changing the benchmark for what a competitive program is. I mean, I think we're going to get into that a little bit deeper later, but just so folks understand the full data gathering process. So it was pretty similar, I think, to past surveys CI&T has done, right? Like in terms of scope and size. Let's kind of talk about the methodology a little bit, just so people understand like how we went through this process.
Yeah, great call. So we surveyed 1,000 and I want to say 22 US consumers. Yes. And they were mostly representative of the US population. We did do a 60-40 split of 60% women, 40% men, just because we were kind of partnering with IPSI on this survey and wanted to make sure that it catered to more of their audience. We also took a pretty balanced approach with Gen Z and millennials and Gen Xers. And then we had boomers only make up like 10% of the survey. So just one caveat from a population standpoint. But yeah, it was about 25, 30 questions. I think it took a little over 10 minutes to complete. And we just really wanted to follow the customer journey when it comes to memberships. So we really did map the whole life cycle. We asked them a lot of questions around why would you sign up for a membership? Why would you continue a membership? Why would you end a membership? And why would you restart it? We also did ask one path to purchase question that I thought was really important, a little less relevant to this particular research, but just relevant to the retail landscape as a whole, which was we showed them every category they could be purchasing in. And we asked them where their most likely first stop was when buying in that category. And we did include subscriptions as an option, but we just wanted to see, are they most of the time starting at Amazon? Are they most of the time starting with a Google search? Are they most of the time starting with a retailer website? And it did depend on the category. It was really interesting to see that 50% of the categories began on some sort of online channel for consumers. 50% of the categories began in stores for consumers. And whether that online channel first touch point was Amazon or a search engine or a retailer site really did vary depending on the category. And we map all of that out. But one thing I really quickly wanted to touch on, where you were saying kind of this baseline with subscription services and everyone's creating their own and figuring that out. I think the analogy that is the most resonant for this is thinking about the airport security line and how now for PreCheck and for Clear, everybody's like, I'm paying for this and I have to wait in line longer than the people that aren't. And I love borrowing from other categories outside of retail to think about things. And I think this is kind of the problem that we have created in the market when brands have been pursuing either a low price competitive advantage or an extreme convenience competitive advantage. With the airport security, you're paying more, but your trade-off is you get convenience. And now everybody was seeking so much convenience that the playing field has been leveled and we have to refigure that out. And then in retail, a lot of times retailers are being forced to lower their prices so much, which is kind of what happens with a subscription model. They're figuring out what economy, of scale they can create for the consumer. And it's making those decisions that is leading to this point where consumers are making calculations to figure out what approach to shopping is most financially wise, and brands have to do the same. So,
yeah. And I think that brings us to like the how we wanted to explore this topic and the topics we knew we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into. And I know just based on your recent research for connected retail that, obviously the economy is a really big component of the conversation, and how that impacts not just how many membership programs people belong to or whether they sign up for a subscription. It's the how do they consider all of this in their decision-making process? And honestly, in my opinion, at least, I feel like that economic baseline, knowing that this is a big part of the consideration set, there's other research and data out there around the average number of programs people belong to and whether they plan to spend more or less on these programs. And I think it's more so through the lens of streaming services, to be honest. And then that gets into subscriptions a little bit. But, once we knew, okay, this is going to be a really big trigger point for people, I feel like that organically led to some of the other areas that we knew we wanted to explore, which connected to that customer journey aspect, I think pretty organically, at least.
Absolutely, it did. Yeah. I mean, one of the questions we posed for them was true or false form. And we had the statement, the state of the economy impacts how interested I am in memberships. 74% said true. And that kind of echoed the same research that you were mentioning in our connected retail report, where consumers were saying that the economy has slightly or significantly impacted their shopping decisions, with the majority of those respondents who said yes to that saying they're trying to save money. And it's just so fascinating to me because the reason we pursued memberships and subscriptions as a topic is what we talked about in the beginning of this conversation. But what became clear throughout the research was, oh, these aren't just subscription and membership issues that consumers have. Like the mindset that consumers have when approaching memberships and subscriptions is exactly how they're approaching all the rest of the retail space. And so if you as a brand or retailer don't have a subscription or membership program, no worries. This research is still extremely relevant to you and to how consumers are approaching your brand when they're shopping.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we had questions around the loyalty component of it too, which to your point can be meaningful and actionable regardless of whether you offer these programs, right? Like, oh, if I'm trying to save money, like I will probably lapse certain memberships. Okay, well, to that end, what makes you decide like what you let go of in this, pile of different programs and memberships that you belong to? And conversely, what gets you to come back? Which I feel like isn't fully explored really in these, surveys, because we just want to know like, okay, why do you leave? So we don't do that.
Yeah,
exactly. But sometimes it's stuff you can't control, right? Like if you have a membership program and it's like the baseline price, it kind of is what it is. But like what else can you do to get people to come back? I thought that was a really nuanced way to think about this topic.
Totally. I loved that we did that. We're just tooting horns this whole conversation. But I thought it was cool because so what we did was we had 4 questions. The first one was, why would you be inspired to sign up for a membership program? And we offered them an exhaustive list of reasons. And they had to choose their top 3 reasons, and they had to rank those top 3. Then we asked them, why would you stay with a membership service, and presented a ton of options and had them rank their top 3 again. We asked, why would you leave or end a membership service, and gave them a ton of options to rank their top 3. And then we open-endedly asked them, why would you restart a membership or subscription service? And It was just so cool to see the changes happen throughout the life cycle. So for signing up for a membership, the most likely reason they said they would is because they would receive discounts on products they would likely want to buy. So price motivated. For why would you stay a member? The most likely reason was access to exclusive deals and differentiated pricing. So again, price oriented. But then when we got to why would you end the membership, the number one reason was poor product quality, which shows you that their kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a membership lifecycle changes depending on the stage that they're in. So when they're thinking about leaving, it has everything to do with the product. Whereas when they're thinking about joining, it has everything to do with the price. And the idea of convenience and the fact that they are receiving items they would already want on this kind of set cadence, they don't have to think about reordering. That was a top 3 reason, both for signing up and for staying, but it wasn't the number 1 and it wasn't the number 2 reason. It was the 3rd most chosen reason for both signing up and staying. So it's a little bit hard to articulate in a podcast. And that's why I think, sharing the report will be so helpful for people to see this visual. But basically, as consumers moved throughout the product and membership throughout the membership life cycle, they became more focused on the exploratory and discovery aspects of the product. Whereas when they started, they were really thinking about the price piece of it. So it's just, it just shows you there are different needs, different priorities, depending on the phase in the membership model. And I think the really big glaring implication for retailers is prioritize different motivations based on what your data tells you as far as where in the life cycle or the journey your consumer is. So if they're just signing up with you, focus on that messaging around price. If they've been with you for a while, keep a focus on the price, but also shift towards the discovery pieces and the exploratory elements of the model. And if you sense from your data that they're thinking about ending it, focus on the product quality and the fact that they couldn't necessarily get that somewhere else. Like you really have to figure out what matters most to them depending on the stage.
Yeah. I think the data really shows how intricate this life cycle is for these programs. Like, I think there's an assumption, or at least initially on my side, it's like, okay, once you become a member, like you're part of this group and like you can just target them specifically and like that's its own segment. But there's truly a like scoring aspect to this. Like if you're in B2B marketing, there's lead scoring, right? Based on the level of engagement. And it shows how intricate and detailed you can get with the messaging based on their interaction, with product and whether they add things to their service, whether they're purchasing things beyond the delivery cycle, how they're engaging with your communication, how they're engaging with the brand. That ability to dig deeper into the data and get more fine-tuned messaging to them, or being able to even fine-tune your program further. I think that was like the clear aha for me. It's like, oh, like there's like a lot more here that could be done. And I'm not sure if brands are doing that fully.
100%. Like, what is your messaging looking like towards the customer, not just based on what you know about them with their buying behaviors? And we did ask about the type of information consumers would want to give in exchange for a membership, but also figuring out what messaging makes the most sense based on how long they've been with you. Because there may be certain things that are now top of mind that you wouldn't assume just from a conventional customer profile.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'll say transparently, there are some programs or memberships that I belonged to for a long time, and I ultimately stopped because sure, like all of the boxes were technically checked, like, product came on time, product was aligned with my profile, but the joy of the unexpected was lost, which I think is kind of like I don't want to say red flag, but it's something to keep in mind, I think, for folks that are thinking about this, that it's almost like you know me so well, like I don't want to say too well, but it's like you're just following the algorithm and like what the profile tells you, and you just follow that to a T, that discovery aspect, which I think came up in the life cycle around, what stage was it? Around reasons to stay, right?
Yes.
It's the introduction to new products and brands I wouldn't otherwise learn of. When that's gone, like that became a big trigger point for me. I'm like, okay, well, what else is there? So like, I think that's time for me to take some space.
Totally. And I think in the ending phase with respect to poor product quality, kind of a similar-ish note of how is your target consumer defining product quality? Because I think about my Rent the Runway subscription, for example, which I'm a big fan of. I talk about it all the time. Lately, though, right? It's like so good. But lately, I have realized a few of my swaps, I haven't had as high of a wear rate. So I'll get 5 items. And in my last haul, I maybe only wore one of them. And was the reason mostly because of sizing, or was the reason because most of the clothing felt like it had been too worn, or what was that? I think as much data as you can collect from the customer explaining the product quality and what that means to them, the more you can figure out, like, are they at risk? Because if I start to feel like too many of my hauls are not fruitful, I'm going to contemplate ending it. So I think there are different types of data and measurements that become relevant depending on the life cycle stage. And so if you knew that someone had stayed for a certain amount of time, maybe you would want to understand, do they feel like they're discovering new brands? Versus if you know they're contemplating ending it, do they feel like most of their hauls have been fruitful and they've worn the clothing? So yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think that raises the idea of like, what does value mean to your consumer? And like, we talked a lot about price. It's, the seamlessness of the program and like the ease and convenience of it all. But for me, sometimes value is like, okay, how good is this thing that I'm getting? Like, did I get that excitement of like, tapping on the example of Rent the Runway, like having so many people compliment, this dress that I wore that I wouldn't have otherwise have access to because I was able to use the membership program and I was able to get this product even for a short amount of time, like at a really steep discount. So it's kind of like that dopamine in a lot of ways that you wouldn't get with just like a standard discount.
Yep. Yeah. And those are metrics that are a little bit more intangible, but are so important to capture, kind of like those status metrics with the compliments and stuff like that. Like I rented a purse, which I don't usually rent bags just because I feel like bags are an accessory I care less about, but I've been getting so many compliments on it. And I've been able to say, oh, it's rented, which seems kind of cool to say because then you're also teaching people about a service and all this stuff. So there's a lot of identity aspects to memberships and subscriptions that I think would be really helpful for brands to be capturing in their metrics as well throughout the life cycle.
Yeah. I love that idea of identity and community and how that could be a possible marketing tie-in or messaging tie-in as you think about the value prop of a program. And I know that's something that came up with Ipsy quite a bit. Like we had their chief merchandising officer on the show a few months back. And it tied in really nicely, I think, with your session at Retail Innovation Conference, is that she mentioned that previously they used membership and subscription interchangeably, like as a term. And they eventually stopped doing that because they wanted to lean more towards memberships and not just the access and exclusivity of the program, but also the community aspect and being able to have that connection to the influencers and celebrities and creators that, play a role in curating the assortment and the boxes that members ultimately get. So that idea of status and identity playing a role in creating the value of a membership program and all of the aspects that it includes was a really interesting takeaway for me, because it's not just something that brands think is important, it's something that consumers are responding to as well.
Totally. Well, and I think a lot of times brands think it's all about the relationship we have with our customers. And they forget that it's also about the relationship that their customers have with each other. And to your point, there's this sense of belonging and a sense of community that really matters in a membership model in particular. And that was what a lot of the verbatims told us, was that where a membership is differentiated from a subscription is it's about the person, not about the product necessarily. And what level of access does that membership give? Is it exclusive? What environment does it offer? And I just saw an article today where Spotify is trying to make the platform more of like a social network and having comments and people can take polls and this and that. And I think the same goes for retailers, where I think I put some of this in the report too, where it's like, it would be awesome to see retailers fostering dialogue and communication among their members, not just between themselves and the members, but having them talk amongst themselves, recommend things to each other. To go back to Rent the Runway, I love seeing what other women have rented, especially who are my size, so I can make some calls on sizing, but also, do they look like they dress like I do normally? Is that someone I want to identify with from a style sense? And I think the more chances you create for your customers to interact and engage with each other, the more attachment they feel to the brand as well, because it then becomes a layer of their identity. So, and like digital is such a gateway to that. Like it's such a channel that's already conducive to fostering a sense of community and guiding conversations between participants and members. So there's so many opportunities to, build exclusive portals through memberships, or like chat room type functions and comment sections and shared lists. And I mean, the sky's the limit. It gets me really excited, as you can tell. I think it's such a cool idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And were there any aspects of like the subscription component, so the routine aspect, was there anything in particular that kind of validated your thoughts on that particular category, or I guess like the types of brands that benefit from this, right? Because I think we've established, like when we think memberships, it seems like the sky's the limit. There are so many different ways to tackle it. But what about subscription specifically? Did you uncover in the research that kind of validated your thoughts and how it could be used effectively for different brands?
Yeah, to use like oxymoronic language, it was kind of a surprising validation in the sense that
you're like, oh, I was right. Hooray.
Like, yeah, we kind of had a hypothesis here of which categories most lent themselves to subscription services, or where consumers said they were most open to having a subscription or already had one. But at the same time, it was kind of counterintuitive because it conflicts with a little bit of what you and I were just talking about, which is like the exclusivity piece, in the sense of, we gave them a list of categories and we said, which of the following are you most open to having a subscription in, or do you already have a subscription in? And the number one category was grocery, which is not an exclusive, everyone needs to buy groceries. It's not an exclusive premium category when you think about it. And then the other categories as well that followed grocery were also kind of routine purchasing categories, like pet supplies, personal care, household goods. And what that really told us was just that the routine nature of certain categories inherently makes them more opportunistic for consumers and makes consumers more likely to say, yeah, I would have a subscription there because I'm buying in that category all the time. So kind of interesting that you want to build and attach this sense of community and belonging and exclusivity to a subscription service. But at the same time, you need to acknowledge the fact that it's likely going to be a category that the consumer has justified having a subscription in by way of the fact that they're making routine purchases there all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think the challenge, or I guess more so the opportunity for folks in those more routine-based categories is like, okay, we have this, we have like the standards. What can we do to go beyond that to further differentiate, if not through the program itself, but through our marketing, through our digital experience? Because, tacking on to the point about grocery, like I'm a longtime Hungry Root subscriber. Like we still go to like the grocery store, of course, like for certain essentials, but I love that service because there's the routine of it all. They're really great at the fulfillment and like last mile aspect, which is inherently difficult, especially for groceries and produce. But then there's also a really strong digital backbone to that entire experience that all members get access to. So being able to customize your preferences, being able to add different meals or, replace meals with individual groceries based on your needs. And this idea that you're kind of part of this community of people that like are sharing their creations and sharing their ideas based on their lifestyles. It's clear that there are inklings of like, okay, how do we go beyond the brand promise without steering too far from it? And I think that's a really interesting opportunity for some folks that do have a subscription component or are thinking of it and want to explore, okay, how can we get a bit more into membership territory, but like knowing our category is not really fit for a full-blown like membership program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two pieces to that. I think one, the importance of data cannot be understated in this space. When you think subscription, maybe at first you think, oh, that's extremely automated, it's autopilot, it's easy. But it actually, if you're doing a really good job and you're speaking to those aspects of like surprise and delight, you need to make really solid predictions. And what's required for that? Data and dynamic data as well. So I think there's that piece of it. And then there's also the fact that consumers don't want to deviate too much, to your point. Like they don't want brands going crazy here and sending them all this stuff that is just going to create clutter and make them feel like they're overpaying. Like if you give them too much, they're going to think, well, how much money am I giving this company in the first place that I'm able to get all these free gifts and all this and that? But you do want the surprise and delight elements to align with the customer's identity, what they're expecting, and then to just shake things up a little bit because these are routine categories. So yeah, but I mean, you even like you could hear that sense of identity when you were saying that you use the Hungry Root membership, which is something I didn't know about you. So learning something new here, but like there's definitely a sense of identity that comes along with these services. And how do you walk that fine balance between the routine nature of it, which is why they're willing to pay for it, but then also giving them some sort of premium something so that they feel rewarded.
100%. Well, I feel like we could talk about this all day because there are so many layers, but as you mentioned, we'll be sure to link the report in the show notes and, additional coverage that we have around this research, because again, there are so many nuggets here that we can latch onto and expand upon. But to close out, Melissa, I'm curious, how do you think this whole space will evolve? Because I think it's a nice closed loop to how we started, which is you were kind of talking about the fatigue that happens in this landscape, or at least the subscription box piece of the whole conversation. Where do you think the space is going? And where are you seeing the most green shoots, so to speak, the most growth opportunity? Because it seems like we're seeing a comeback, right? Like I know my 6-year-old son is already expressing interest in like the craft boxes, like the KiwiCos and all of these other programs that do have a recurring purchase component, but do have like YouTube tutorials and communities. So it's like interesting to see how like robust like some of these companies are getting. So where do you think this is all going?
Totally. I think the future of this is really kind of dependent on AI and in a cool way. I'm going to use or create a new term right now. We'll see if it sticks, but like trigger point subscriptions or acute subscriptions of the future, where basically a consumer could program some logic collaboratively with a retailer to say, when a price point gets to this, I'm willing to buy it, repeatedly or whatever. Like when a price point stabilizes at a certain place, or when inventory drops to a certain level, I'm willing to buy this much quantity from that retailer. I think we'll see more of kind of dynamic in the moment adjustments being able to be made to subscription models so that consumers, or memberships either way, so that consumers feel more in control. Think about if we go back to the Rent the Runway idea, months where I have less weddings, less social life, maybe I'll take a scaled back approach to my membership and it'll be less expensive. They'll acknowledge that I can just change it on a monthly basis or whatever. So I think the future of memberships and subscriptions is a lot more dynamic. And I think AI will be super useful in that. And it'll allow consumers to save money where it makes sense for them and they'll feel good about it. And it'll allow retailers to kind of level out their inventory in great ways. So yeah, should we put trigger point subscriptions as the new term for memberships going forward?
I love that.
Cool.
Yeah, because I mean, that's really the opportunity, right? Being able to understand all of those influences in the consumer's life, like what ultimately drives them to be interested in, a subscription or membership program, and how will that prompt frequency and engagement and what they expect from a marketing standpoint. And, that kind of connects to the most recent program that I subscribed to. I mentioned my son. The name escapes me now. But essentially, in a nutshell, the membership program is typically like a monthly thing. So every month you get it's like a STEM box, cool. And it's like a different STEM project. You go to YouTube, you watch the tutorial, you go through the process, and then you have like a cool toy, right? And like they teach the physics behind it. It's actually pretty interesting. I know.
Way over my head, but I love it.
Yeah, like the guy used to work for NASA. I think it's called Crate Labs.
Okay.
Labs, something like that.
Okay, yeah.
But anyways, so usually the frequency is once a month, but they had a campaign that started end of June, and they did an accelerated summer camp program. So rather than monthly, it's like, okay, for a little more money for this, I guess it's like a deep dive program, you actually get the boxes once a week. And you get to be a part of like this summer camp, quote unquote, where you not only get access to the videos, you get access to exclusive live streams, and you can join this community where you share your creation and you get considered for this sweepstake. So it's interesting. They took that trigger point of like, okay, kids are out of school. How am I going to keep them busy? Which, yeah, basically same. And turned it into an opportunity for people to be more engaged with the brand, but also for them to get that extra bump in purchases, right? So It was very strategic. Like as someone in the industry, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like I'm sure other brands could take this approach too.
Totally. And if consumers are allowed to be in control of some of the logic behind those fluctuations, I think one, you get their buy-in for giving you more data. Like they would then know, oh, Melissa has less weddings in this month. That's helpful for us to know. And two, the consumer feels empowered. They feel like they're contributing to their own budget in the right way by pulling back, and they can adjust that fluctuation based on whatever variables they want. But yeah, I think it's almost like when you unsubscribe to a streaming service and it's like, why are you leaving? And you fill out that one thing. If you could do it in kind of an acute way and you don't have to go through it every single time you do it, but you can kind of just ebb and flow the service, I think that would be so much more helpful for everybody.
Totally. And by the way, it is Crunch Lab. So for anyone interested, if you want to keep your kid busy, I would recommend looking into it.
If you have a really smart kid.
All right. Well, Melissa, I feel like we could talk for hours about this. Again, I appreciate you and the CI&T team. Ooh, that was a mouthful. Working with us to, put the survey together and for putting such great analysis together. We're obviously getting a lot of value and great commentary out of it. So thank you so much again for working with me on it and for joining me for this chat.
Thank you. I'm excited for people to read the report. Hopefully they'll send us some comments on LinkedIn or something, letting us know what they thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we're putting that in the show notes for you all to download, dig into, hopefully share with your team. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the research, what you got out of it, what intrigued you, or possibly how you plan to use this data to further your subscription and membership programs. We would love to hear from you on LinkedIn, or feel free to leave us a rating or review on your preferred podcast player, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else. We want to keep the conversation going, so let us know your thoughts. But for now, that is it from us, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Retail Remix. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on your favorite podcast player. Until next time, keep mixing it up.